The evening was calm, and the small-town restaurant was alive with the chatter of people, the clinking of glasses, and the warm smell of freshly cooked food. Families were laughing, couples were sharing quiet conversations, and groups of friends were celebrating small moments. It was the kind of place where comfort lived in every corner, and no one thought twice about the good life they were enjoying. The door creaked open, and a man walked in slowly. His clothes were worn out, his shoes were scuffed, and his face carried the tired lines of someone who had walked too many miles without rest. He stood there for a moment, his eyes searching the room, as if unsure whether he should even be there. People turned their heads, some raising eyebrows, others whispering behind their hands. He walked up to the counter, his voice low but polite. He asked if he could have something simple to eat, even just a little plate, promising he would pay soon. His words were gentle, almost apologetic, as if he was ashamed of needing to ask. The young waiter behind the counter gave him a quick look, then another at the manager. The manager frowned, his arms folded, and shook his head before the man could finish speaking. "This is not a place for people like you," the manager said, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. A few customers chuckled. Someone muttered, "He should go somewhere else." The man's face turned red, not from anger, but from humiliation. He lowered his eyes, nodded slightly, and turned toward the door. He did not argue, did not beg, did not explain. He simply accepted the rejection, shoulders heavy with shame, and walked slowly back outside. The laughter and chatter quickly returned inside, as if nothing unusual had happened. But at one corner table, a woman had seen everything. She had noticed the man's trembling hands, the way he tried to hold himself with dignity despite his situation. Her heart felt heavy as she watched him leave, the image of his tired eyes staying with her. She could not shake the feeling that what had just happened was wrong. To everyone else, it was only a small interruption in their pleasant evening. But to her, it was more than that. It was the picture of loneliness, of someone invisible in a room full of people. She knew that the man had probably swallowed his pride before stepping into the restaurant, hoping for a little kindness, only to walk out with his spirit crushed even more. Without thinking too much, she rose from her seat. Her friends at the table asked where she was going, but she only smiled faintly and said she would be back. Stepping outside, she saw him sitting on the edge of the sidewalk near the restaurant. His head lowered, hands clasped together as if in silent thought. She walked toward him, her footsteps light but determined. The man looked up, startled, as though he expected more rejection. She offered a kind smile and asked softly if he would allow her to buy him a meal. For a moment he hesitated, his pride warring with his hunger. But the warmth in her eyes made him nod, though his voice cracked as he thanked her. They walked together to a small cafe down the street, a place less crowded, with soft lights and the smell of home-cooked food. The woman ordered 2 plates of soup and bread, nothing fancy, but warm and filling. As they sat down, she tried to make the moment light, asking if he preferred tea or coffee. He smiled shyly, saying he had not tasted either in weeks. When the food arrived, he ate slowly at first, as though afraid to look greedy, then with more ease when she encouraged him. She watched quietly, her heart warming at the simple sight of someone finding comfort in a hot meal. She did not ask many questions at first, only letting him feel safe enough to speak when he was ready. After a while, his voice grew steadier. He told her that he once had a job, a small apartment, and even a circle of friends. But when the company he worked for closed down, he lost his income. Slowly, one thing after another slipped away: his rent, his savings, his confidence. The people he thought would help him disappeared too. Now he was trying to survive day by day, carrying nothing but hope that someone would see him as more than just a burden. The woman listened, her hands resting gently around her cup. She did not interrupt, did not give him pity, only listened with the quiet respect of someone who truly cared. And for the first time in a long time, the man felt like a human being again. Not a shadow passing through busy streets. Inside that small cafe, surrounded by the hum of soft conversations and the clatter of dishes, something simple but powerful happened. One person's rejection had been replaced by another's kindness. One act of cruelty was answered with compassion. And though the man did not know it yet, this moment was not just about filling his stomach. It was the beginning of a bond that would change his life forever. The night outside was cool, and the cafe's soft glow wrapped around the two of them like a quiet shelter. The man sat with his hands close to the bowl of soup, as if soaking in the warmth, not just from the food, but also from the unexpected kindness sitting across from him. For a long time, he had walked through streets filled with people who hurried past him, who looked away, who pretended he wasn't there. Now someone had chosen to sit with him, to share a table as if his presence mattered. The woman did not rush him. She let him eat at his own pace, sipping her own tea as she watched him slowly come back to life. His tired eyes began to brighten, his shoulders lifted a little, and the trembling in his hands seemed to ease. She could sense how much it meant to him to be treated like an equal, not as someone to be pitied or shamed. After a few moments of silence, she gently asked if he wanted to talk more about himself. His gaze dropped for a moment, as if the memories were heavy, but then he began to speak. He told her that once he had been like any other working man, waking up every day with purpose, feeling proud to provide for himself. But when he lost his job, everything slowly slipped away. At first, he thought it was temporary. Then months passed, and every door seemed to close. Friends stopped calling. His savings ran out. He tried to keep his pride, but hunger and cold nights made it hard to hide his struggles. The woman listened with quiet care, nodding when his voice cracked, offering small words of encouragement when he paused. She didn't tell him what he should have done differently. She didn't lecture him. She simply gave him the gift of being heard. Something he hadn't experienced in a very long time. The cafe staff glanced their way now and then, curious about the pair sitting together, but no one disturbed them. It was just two people in a corner booth, sharing food. Yet to him it felt like the most important meal of his life. When the bowls were empty, the woman smiled and asked if he would like something sweet to end the evening. At first, he shook his head quickly, embarrassed at the thought of her spending more on him. But she insisted gently, saying, "It's not about the price. It's about enjoying the moment." Her words carried a warmth that eased his hesitation. And soon they were sharing a small slice of pie between them. For a little while, the heaviness of his world seemed to melt away. They laughed softly over the pie, and he even made a small joke about how long it had been since he'd tasted something sweet. The woman's heart lifted, seeing the man rediscover a spark of joy. As they finished, she leaned forward and told him he didn't have to face everything alone. She explained that there were shelters nearby, small community programs, and places where he could find support. She even offered to walk with him the next day, to show him where to go. The man's eyes widened in surprise. He had expected her kindness to end at the meal. But here she was offering more: her time, her effort, her willingness to stand beside him. He struggled to find the right words, finally whispering, "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." The woman smiled, her eyes kind and steady. "Because everyone deserves to be treated like they matter. You matter." Those words sank deep into him. He looked down at his hands, scarred from hard work and rough nights. And for the first time in months, maybe years, he felt a glimmer of hope. When they stepped back into the night, the streets were quiet, the cafe lights fading behind them. She walked with him for a while, asking simple questions: what kind of work he once did, what skills he had, what he wished for if life gave him another chance. He answered shyly at first, but with each step, his voice grew steadier. By the time they parted ways, there was something new in the air. The man stood taller, clutching the bag of food she had insisted he take for later. The woman promised to meet him again the next day, and he nodded, unable to hide the small smile tugging at his lips. That night, as he found a spot to rest, the bag of food beside him, he replayed the evening in his mind. The cruel laughter in the restaurant still stung, but now it was overshadowed by the kindness of a stranger who saw him not as a burden, but as a person worth helping. He whispered a quiet thank you to the empty night, knowing that something had changed. And the woman, as she walked home, also felt different. She thought about how easy it would have been to stay silent, to let him walk away unseen. But instead, she had taken a step, and that step had opened a door for him. And maybe for her too. Neither of them knew it yet. But this was only the beginning of a bond that would soon grow stronger, leading to a future neither could have imagined. Days turned into weeks, and the promise she had made outside the cafe was not forgotten. The very next morning, she walked back to the spot where she had left him, unsure if he would be there. Part of her worried that he might have disappeared, lost again in the endless streets. But to her relief he appeared, waiting quietly, holding the bag she had given him as though it were a treasure. When he saw her, his face lit up in a way that surprised even him. No one had ever come back for him before. People often offered quick coins, sometimes old clothes, but they never returned, never stayed. Yet here she was, keeping her word. Together, they walked through the city. She showed him a shelter where he could find a safe place to rest, and she spoke to the volunteers there, making sure he wouldn't be turned away. They also stopped at a community center where notices for small jobs were pinned to a board. She encouraged him to write his name, even if his confidence wavered. For the first time in months, he felt like someone was walking beside him not out of duty, but out of genuine care. At first, he found it difficult to accept her help. Pride whispered in his ear, reminding him that he should stand on his own, that he should not lean on kindness. But every time he doubted, she reminded him with simple words, "It's okay to accept help. Everyone needs a hand sometimes." Slowly, her words began to soften the walls he had built around his heart. Over the next weeks, their meetings became a quiet routine. Sometimes they met for coffee, sometimes just for a walk in the park. He began to tell her more stories from his life, the time he fixed things for neighbors, the songs his mother used to sing, the long hours he once worked at a factory that shut down without warning. She listened closely, not because the details were extraordinary, but because they were his, and in return, she shared small pieces of her own life, her own struggles. The nights she had felt lonely, the times she doubted herself. They began to laugh together, to speak about ordinary things like the weather or a new shop opening on the street. In those moments, the distance between them shrank. It wasn't charity anymore. It was connection. One afternoon, she brought him a second-hand jacket she had found. It was simple, dark and warm. When she handed it to him, he tried to refuse, but she gently draped it over his shoulders. "You'll need this," she said. The man looked down at the jacket, then back at her, his eyes shining with quiet gratitude. It wasn't just a piece of clothing. It was dignity, a reminder that he was not invisible. Little by little, he started to change. His steps grew steadier. His eyes carried less shame. He even managed to get small day jobs, carrying boxes, cleaning yards work that put a little money in his pocket. Whenever he earned, he proudly paid for their tea, even if she insisted she didn't mind covering it. It was his way of showing that he was trying, that her faith in him was not wasted. The woman noticed these changes, and her heart swelled. She hadn't expected much when she first followed him out of the restaurant that night. All she wanted was to offer a meal. But now, watching him reclaim his strength, she realized that kindness could spark something far greater than she imagined. Still, there were moments of silence in him, shadows that lingered. Some nights he disappeared, not saying where he went, and she didn't ask too many questions, giving him space. But every time he returned, he came back a little stronger, a little more determined. One evening, as they sat on a park bench, he turned to her with a seriousness she hadn't seen before. "You've given me more than food, more than clothes," he said. "You've given me back my belief in people. I thought the world had forgotten me." She smiled softly, touched by his words. "The world can be unkind," she replied. "But it only takes one moment, one person, to remind us that we're not alone." For him, she had become that reminder. For her, he had become proof that even the smallest acts of kindness could ripple out into something much bigger. As the weeks passed, others began to notice too. Volunteers at the shelter commented on how different he looked. Shopkeepers nodded at him respectfully when he passed by. Even strangers seemed to see him more clearly, but neither of them knew that this bond they had built, grounded in simple acts and honest words, was leading them towards something extraordinary, something that would soon test their faith in each other and reveal rewards beyond imagination. The days grew colder, and the woman kept her quiet routine of checking in with him. Sometimes she found him waiting near the cafe, other times at the park bench where they often shared warm drinks. Each time he greeted her with a little more confidence, as if he was slowly reclaiming the pieces of himself that the world had taken away. She felt a quiet joy every time she saw him smile, but then, one morning, something felt different. She went to the park bench at their usual meeting time, a cup of coffee in her hand for him, but the bench was empty. She waited for a while, thinking maybe he was delayed. Minutes stretched into hours, but he never came. The next day, she returned, hoping it was just a missed meeting. Again, the bench was empty. She tried the cafe, the shelter, even the street corner where she had first seen him. There was no sign of him anywhere. At first, she told herself he must be busy with some small job. But as more days passed, worry gnawed at her heart. She remembered the look in his eyes when he told her about the nights he had gone hungry, the way shame still lingered in his posture despite the progress he had made. She feared that maybe the weight of his past had become too heavy again, pulling him back into the shadows. The emptiness of those days surprised her. She hadn't realized how much his presence had become a part of her own life. She would catch herself glancing toward the cafe door, half expecting him to walk in. She would sit at the bench, remembering the way he laughed over a simple slice of pie. The silence he left behind felt louder than any words. She spoke to the volunteers at the shelter, asking if they had seen him. They shook their heads. Some said maybe he had moved on to another town. Others guessed he might have found steady work and no longer needed the shelter. But none of them knew for sure. Her heart carried questions without answers. Had he simply decided to leave? Had something bad happened? Or had he felt that he didn't want to burden her anymore? The uncertainty kept her awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she had done enough. Weeks passed, and life around her moved forward. The streets filled with holiday lights, stores buzzed with shoppers, and laughter floated through the air. But for her, something was missing. It was as though the kindness she had given had left a space in her own heart, a space now empty. Sometimes she doubted herself. Maybe she had been foolish to care so much. Maybe it was never her place to get involved. Yet deep down, she knew she wouldn't change what she had done. She remembered the look on his face when he wore that jacket for the first time, the quiet gratitude in his voice when he said she made him believe in people again. That memory reminded her that even if he never returned, the kindness had still mattered. One evening, as she walked past the same restaurant where it had all begun, she slowed her steps. The laughter inside reminded her of that first night, the rejection, the humiliation, the way he had walked out with his head lowered. She stood there for a while, staring at the door, almost expecting him to step out again. But the door opened only for strangers, faces she did not know. Her friends noticed she had grown quieter. They asked why she spent so much time alone, why she seemed distracted. She smiled faintly and brushed off their questions. Unwilling to explain the story, That was still unfinished in her own heart. It was in these moments of waiting and wondering that she realized how much he had come to mean to her. He was no longer just a stranger she had helped one night. He had become someone whose journey had touched her deeply, someone whose absence left her restless, that she held on to a small, fragile hope. Hope that wherever he was, he remembered her words. Hope that the kindness she had given was still carrying him forward. And though she didn't know it yet, this quiet hope would not be in vain. Because far away from her, beyond her knowledge, the man was on a path that would soon circle back in ways she could never have imagined. The silence of his absence was not the end of the story. It was the pause before a return that would bring with it something extraordinary, something that would change both of their lives forever. Months slipped by, and the woman carried on with her life, though a piece of her heart always seemed to wander back to that empty bench, the little cafe, and the memory of a man who had disappeared without a word. She often replayed their conversations, in her mind, reminding herself that kindness was never wasted, even if she never saw him again. Still, deep down, she wished for just one sign, one proof that he was all right. One chilly morning, as she walked to work, she noticed something unusual. Outside her workplace, a row of sleek black cars was parked, their polished surfaces shining under the winter sun. People gathered around, whispering in curiosity. It looked like someone important had arrived. She paid little attention at first, assuming it was none of her concern, until the doors opened and a tall, well-dressed man stepped out. At first, she barely recognized him. His hair was neat, his suit perfectly tailored, and his presence carried a quiet strength. But then, as he turned and smiled, her heart nearly stopped. It was him, the same man she had once seen humiliated in that restaurant, the same man she had sat with in a cafe over a bowl of soup. For a moment, she stood frozen, unable to believe her eyes. He walked toward her with steady steps, and as the crowd looked on, he greeted her with warmth that could not be mistaken. "You kept me alive when I had nothing," he said, his voice clear and strong. "And I promised myself that one day, I would come back not as the broken man you once found, but as someone worthy of your kindness." Tears welled in her eyes as she listened. She tried to speak, but her voice trembled. He went on to explain how, after disappearing, he had taken the courage she had given him and used it to rebuild his life. He had found steady work, saved what little he could, and eventually reconnected with an old acquaintance who offered him a chance in business. With hard work and determination, doors began to open again. "I didn't want to return to you empty-handed," he admitted. "That's why I disappeared. I needed time to stand on my own feet, to prove that your kindness hadn't been wasted." The people around them watched in silence, sensing the weight of the moment. Some even pulled out their phones, capturing the reunion without fully understanding its meaning. Then, in front of everyone, the man reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. He handed it to her with a smile. Confused, she opened it and gasped. Inside was a document papers showing ownership of a new community center, being built in the city, a place dedicated to helping those in need, a place where no one would be turned away hungry. "I named it after you," he said softly, "because you showed me what compassion looks like. This isn't just for me, it's for everyone who feels forgotten, and it's because of you." Her hands shook as she held the papers, overwhelmed. She had never imagined that one small act, buying a meal for a stranger, could ripple into something so life-changing. She didn't care about the grand gesture or the cars or the papers. What mattered was the man standing before her, alive, strong, and grateful. The crowd clapped, touched by the story unfolding before their eyes, though most of them would never know the full depth of what had passed between them. For her, it was not about applause. It was about knowing that kindness had come full circle in the most unexpected way. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she finally found her voice. "You didn't owe me anything," she whispered. He shook his head gently. "Maybe not. But I owed it to myself to honor the gift you gave me, the gift of believing in me when no one else did. In that moment, she realized that rewards do not always come in money, gifts, or recognition. Sometimes the true reward is witnessing someone rise, knowing you had a part in helping them stand again. Yet here she was, given both the emotional joy of seeing him thrive and the tangible proof of a legacy that would help countless others. As they stood there, side by side, the winter breeze carried a sense of closure and new beginnings. Their paths, once so unlikely to cross, had intertwined in a way neither could have imagined. The woman had offered a simple act of kindness on a night when the world chose cruelty. And that single act had blossomed into a story of hope, resilience, and gratitude that would echo far beyond the two of them. And though she had never expected anything in return, fate had rewarded her in ways she could never have dreamed, proving once again that even the smallest kindness can create ripples that turn into waves.